I walked into the Halloween party at my son's house and heard my daughter-in-law ask, "How is that old woman still alive?" Everyone laughed. I didn't leave, I walked straight inside, and I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you're listening to this story from. My name is Mabel Anderson, 73 years old, living alone in Greenway. No one in the family told me about the Halloween party at Carl's house this year. The family group chat was buzzing non-stop, but my name wasn't on the list. I didn't bother replying to anyone. I thought of Ruby and Trent, my 2 grandkids growing up so fast while the adults switch roles even faster. So that morning, I still baked a tray of peach cobbler, sprinkled cinnamon for the scent, wrapped it carefully in foil, and placed it on the passenger seat. No invitation, no card, no confirmation, just one simple reason. My son was there, my grandkids were there, and I knew the way. Carl's house was decorated from the front gate, grinning jack-o'-lanterns, strings of orange lights covering the porch. I went around to the back door so I wouldn't interrupt the grand greetings in the living room. Cold wind slipped through the collar of my old gray sweater. I paused just behind a plastic spiderweb curtain, warm dish in my hands. Inside, the music was loud, laughter layered over the clinking of plastic cups. Jody was standing in the middle of the yard, a silver plastic crown catching the lights, speaking loud enough for both sides of the family to hear. I don't know why she's still hanging around. Some things should have stayed buried a long time ago. A few people laughed. I saw Carl in that group, beer in hand, his shoulders shaking. No one asked, "Where's Mabel?" No one said, "That's too much." In Greenway, the houses might be far enough apart to keep things polite, but a sentence like that can still cut straight to the bone. I held the peach cobbler with both hands. The old gray sweater rubbed against my arms, its rough yarn whispering, "Don't shake." I pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges swallowed by the Halloween music. Orange light washed over my face. No costume. I was the only one bare-faced in a house full of masks. I set the tray on the long table. "Help yourselves. It's still warm," I said softly, as if I'd heard nothing before. But no one paid me any mind. Ruby glanced at me for half a second, then dropped her eyes back to her phone, nails tapping rapidly on the screen. Carl's in-laws were handing out candy, everyone busy with their own part of the show, none of them caring that I had arrived. Carl raised his cup. "Cheers to family." He didn't look my way. A line of people clinked their plastic cups, the sound hollow. I sat at the end of the table, right in that wooden chair that always got pushed tight against the wall because it keeps the walkway clear. I listened to them talk about work at the firm, school activities, Thanksgiving turkeys. Not a single topic needed my voice. No one needed my memory. A child ran by and spilled a bit of ice cream on my sleeve. "Sorry," he said quickly, eyes still glued to his glowing toy hat. Jody noticed the smudge, smiling a neat little smile. "Look at that, still clumsy as ever." Her voice snapped like a cork popping off a bottle. I didn't respond. I grabbed a napkin, wiped my sleeve, secured the edge of the tray so it wouldn't slide. I counted the people in the backyard, over 30. Just one person saying, "Let me get you a plate," and the whole room would shift direction like a boat catching wind. But this boat had chosen to row against me. I looked around. Carl in a cowboy hat and plaid scarf. Jody dressed as a skeletal queen, her silver plastic crown like a small blade in her hair. The relatives, her parents, siblings-in-law, friends all busy with their performances. I breathed in the smell of apple cider, melting butter from the dinner rolls, dried pumpkin. I didn't describe much, I just stored it away, so next time, I won't mistakenly believe I have a place here. A girl around 8 tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mom, who made the peach cobbler?" The mother glanced past me with a thoughtless look, probably store-bought. I didn't correct her. They could eat it, if they wanted. I've learned to let the aroma do its work without needing a name attached. Ruby looked at me again. This time her eyes lingered for a single beat. I caught it. I nodded slightly as if to say, "It's okay." She bit her lip and lowered her head, letting herself drift back into her group of Vampire Cape friends. I stayed until the very end. Not because I was lonely. I wanted to record the silence, the carelessness this family had for me. As the party wound down, someone turned on a fog machine. Thin smoke like a borrowed blanket spread across the backyard. I stood, carrying the half-full tray. A little boy said, "Ma'am, this is really good." I paused for half a second, not sure who he belonged to. "Thank you," I said. I walked past Carl. He looked at me the way you'd look at a polite neighbor. "Heading out, Mom?" I nodded. "Yes. I'm kind of busy," he said, already turning to someone else. The words skimmed past me like a dry leaf. Outside, the wind bit colder. I pulled my sweater tight. As I opened the back door to head to the front yard, I heard Jody say to someone low, but sharp enough, "It's about time we cleared out the old stuff from the house." No one asked what old stuff meant, but I knew exactly who she meant. I drove home along leaf-strewn streets, porch lights glowing warm in neighbors' yards. I knew every pothole on that road, the same way I now knew every empty space at that party. At home, I set the tray on the counter, took off my sweater, and hung it on the hook. I stood there for a long time. The face of a 73-year-old woman. No costume, no foundation, no mascara. Every wrinkle, the most honest record of my life. I opened the drawer, took out a small notebook, set pen to a blank page. I wrote one single line, large enough to read clearly tomorrow. "From now on, I will show up without begging." I didn't add a date. I didn't need witnesses. I chose for myself a signature that doesn't require ink. The morning after Halloween, I pulled a chair up to the kitchen table, the same table I've used to sign countless important papers in my life. When Frank was alive, we saved bit by bit. His retirement, the savings from the little auto repair shop he ran for 22 years, the money from selling a parcel of land the family left us in Ohio. We always told ourselves, so someday Carl and his family will have a solid foundation. But since Frank died, this house became an asset, and I became the named owner of something everybody felt entitled to measure. The inquiries thinned out. Instead, relatives started making half-joking, half-serious comments. "Mabel's still doing okay, who knows for how long." Words that sounded like concern, but their eyes kept sliding to the things behind me. The china set, the leather chair, the savings account balance, this house. My phone buzzed on the counter. The family chat lit up with pictures from last night. Children in costume, adults raising glasses, Carl putting his arm around Jody, both of them smiling beneath the orange lights. Under one photo, a tidy comment, "This house will probably be the family's main gathering place from now on." No one mentioned me. No one asked why someone was missing from the picture. I turned the sound on long enough to hear a notification ping, then turned it off. I don't need to be in a picture for people to know I'm still here. I pulled the old will closer. Carl's name sat where, at signing time, I thought made sense. Only son, trustworthy. I still remember handing him the pen, his hand shaking with emotion, saying, "I'll take care of Mom." Once signed, everything slid on as assumption. With a firstborn, everything's taken care of. But the one who's taking care of things had laughed at the moment others wanted me to disappear. I set the paper down. The cool surface of the table met the sleeve of my sweater. I dialed an old number. Lena answered on the third ring. Her voice hadn't changed over the years. "Mabel?" "It's me," I said, eyes on the stack of papers like they were a map. "I want to rearrange things." There was a pause on the other end. "If you really want to rearrange, start with the power to decide. You gave that away too easily once. This time I'll be more careful." I answered briefly. No more explanation needed. Lena understood a short sentence. "Do you have all the documents with you?" "I have them," I said. "There's one thing I want to do first. The power of attorney. The paper that lets Carl sign for me on some bank and medical matters." "Power of attorney," Lena repeated, pronouncing each word. "Revoke it." Lena set an appointment. "Bring the old copy. I'll prepare the rest. It will take time, the system has several checks." "I can wait," I said. After we hung up, I turned back to the stack. The red pen traced new boundaries. Review, reclaim, retain. Each line was a steadying heartbeat. My phone kept buzzing. Another photo. Jody wearing her plastic crown, captioned, "Queen of the Night." Someone joked, "Next time Grandma should dress as Sleeping Beauty and just stay asleep." Laughing emojis filled the thread. I closed the screen and slid the phone into a drawer. I took out a thin envelope containing the account statement. Seeing my name printed bold in the upper left corner, I remembered when Frank was alive he used to say, "Papers never love anyone. but they follow whoever signs them. I rested my hand over my old signature. The shaky loops from years ago were nothing like the steady pen I wanted to use today. I whispered, like a ritual. From now on, I signed for myself. And the next things to do were amend the will, prepare a living trust, purpose, Greenway Women's Shelter. I wrote the full name, no abbreviation to make sure it wasn't some vague notion. It's a specific address, a place with people waiting. I thought about the trust, simply put. Instead of waiting until I'm no longer breathing to transfer assets, I put them into a legal box now while I'm still lucid and willing. I hold the key. I choose the destination. No family council, no debate. Lena texted. Appointment set. I'll go over each form in plain language and move as fast as the system lets me. You don't have to worry about the wording. I replied. Thank you. I'll take care of keeping quiet. I changed my sweater, grabbed the file bag, and drove a few streets over to Lena's house. She opened the door, arms folded, looking at me like someone who'd come to the right place. She laid the forms on the table. We'll do this step by step, tight, so no one can pick it apart. When I stepped out of Lena's house, the wind hit my face cool and clean. I stood on the porch for 2 seconds, just long enough to rebalance my weight on my shoes. In my pocket, the first confirmation rustled, sounding like a dry branch snapping. Not loud, but decisive. I understood what lay ahead wouldn't be pleasant. Phone calls, messages, whispered comments, a few feigned sympathetic glances. I'm not asking for a smooth road. I only need it to go the way I choose. The next morning, I called a locksmith, using the number on a flyer from the grocery store. He arrived right on time, his pickup parked neatly at the curb. I pointed to the front door, the back door, then the safe lock in the bedroom. He nodded and got to work, not much of a talker. By noon, I was at the computer, reopening my banking apps. I deleted the old passwords, the ones I'd made easy to remember, and set new strings only I would understand, typing slow and steady, like stitching a seam. Every time the system asked, "Who else has access?" I clicked no one. There would be no one in the shared access column. Confirmation texts came through, the screen flashing dry, straightforward messages. Change successful. I read them the way I'd read highway signs. They don't have to be pretty, just pointed in the right direction. My phone buzzed nonstop, the relatives still riding the Halloween high. They shared photos of decorations, videos of kids screaming with excitement, then slid smoothly into a new topic as casually as talking about a sale rack. Her hardcover book collection must be worth something, someone wrote. That leather chair would look great in my living room, my sister-in-law commented publicly. Someone else added, that landscape painting over the fireplace should stay with the main branch of the family. The words moved across the screen like pre-printed price tags slapped on items that haven't even gathered dust yet. No one asked if I was still reading along. Maybe they expected I'd gotten used to being itemized. Then Carl messaged me privately. Don't worry, Mom. I'll take good care of the house when the time comes. I stared at that sentence for a long moment. He used the exact tone people use with the elderly, gentle, certain, assumptive. I typed back, you don't have to worry. I'm still very much capable. The period at the end felt like a nail I had just driven into a doorframe. I hit send. No explaining. I did wonder, how did my son turn out this way? That question dragged me back to a distant winter when I opened an envelope at the dining table and counted 40 slips of paper. $40,000. Money pulled from my retirement account, transferred to Carl to put down on his first house. That day, we sat together in a tiny real estate office, smelling of machine-brewed coffee and fresh documents. He put his arm around me, his forehead touching my hair. I'll never forget what you've done for me. I trusted it the way people trust a train schedule. It will arrive on time. A few years later, that promise never came back. Only insurance fees, roof repair bills, the new furnace line items stamped under my name. The moral debt vanished like a text deleted from the conversation history. Rain poured over Greenway that afternoon. I was rinsing a cup, setting it upside down on a cloth when a soft knock tapped at the back door. 3 knocks, hesitant. I froze half a second, then stepped over and opened it just a crack. Ruby was standing there, her hoodie soaked across the shoulders, her eyes darting around the yard like someone might be watching. I didn't tell my parents I'm here, she whispered, her breath turning into a thin mist in the damp air. I opened the door wider, stepped aside for her to come in, no questions asked. She slipped inside, pushed her hood down, set her backpack next to the doormat. Her hands were clenched so tight the knuckles were white. "I'm sorry," she swallowed, voice scraping through her teeth. "I laughed that night. I was scared if I didn't laugh, they'd treat me like they treat you." The last line rushed out, like if she waited even a second longer, she'd lose the courage. I hung her hoodie on the hook and pointed to a chair. The rug by the fireplace was darkened with the rain still clinging to her shoes. I boiled water, dropped 2 tea bags into the glass pot. The kitchen smelled of dried ginger and brown sugar left over from yesterday's baking. Ruby sat straight, like she was in class, staring at the water streaking down the window pane. I set a mug of hot tea in front of her and nudged a plate of salted butter cookies closer. She didn't reach for anything. I didn't push. "Why did you come at this hour?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "School. Ended late. Mom's on a Zoom meeting. Dad's at the gym with a friend," she said, then quickly added, "I'll leave before 7. No one will know." I nodded. "Take a sip. Your hands are cold." She lifted the cup, inhaled before tasting it. Her shoulders dropped a little. Heat flushed her cheeks. Rain still clung to the hair near her temples. I sat across from her, keeping the questions in my head still. After a while, Ruby set the cup down and spoke without looking at me. "That night?" I laughed. My friends did too. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I didn't laugh, Mom would look at me the way she looks at you. "Peace and happiness only come from the truth," I said, not pressing, just placing a stone on the table so she could see its shape. "Not from performing." Her eyes flicked up at me. Her lips trembled from heat or fear. I couldn't tell. "Mom told everyone. She just loves to play the victim. She said you're always talking about the past." She let out a dry laugh. "I guess that makes it easier for everyone to take her side." Then she turned away, eyes reddening. The tears fell quietly. I handed her the tissue box and asked, "And you? Do you think I am who your mother says I am?" Ruby shook her head immediately, no hesitation. Small movement, firm meaning. She dabbed her eyes, sniffed. "I saw you, just sitting there, not asking for anything." And I felt sick about my own laughter. I leaned gently against the back of the chair, letting my shoulders drop. You could hear the rain mixed with the heater clicking on and off at its own rhythm. "At home, what do they say about me?" I asked the question meant for both of us. Ruby faltered. "They say you're hard to please. You make everything complicated. You hold on to things, the house, stuff from the past." A pause, then softer. "But I think they hold on to their version of the story even tighter." I set my cup down. "Maybe. People cling to their stories, so they don't have to face the ugly mirror." I tilted my head. "Do you need me to badmouth someone so you'll feel less guilty?" She let out a tiny laugh. "No, I came here to badmouth myself." She pulled a small notebook from her backpack, flipped the cover with a cat sticker, then shut it again, flustered. "I don't know how to begin." "Start with the fact that you already did the hard thing," I said. "You knocked." Silence thickened for a moment, then softened. She reached for the cookie plate, broke one in half, and ate slowly. "I'm scared Mom will find out," she told me. "Anyone who follows her will catch her bitterness." "I don't think you're bitter. I think you just stop talking." "Yes, I'm seeing what silence can do that words can't," I replied. Like that night. I stayed the whole time, so I could remember exactly how a room functions when someone goes unseen. "I know," Ruby said. "In that room, there wasn't a seat for you. More like they pushed the seat up against the wall." I nodded toward the door. "But my back door is still open." Ruby sighed, her breath collapsing into her hands. "I want to keep coming, without anyone knowing, at least for now." I nodded. I stood, opened a drawer, and took out a thin envelope, an old photograph inside, the edges yellowed. I slid it across the table. "Keep this, so you remember I was real." She opened the envelope and pulled out the picture me holding her when she was 3, her small hand gripping the collar of my sweater, her eyes wide with laughter. Sunlight slanted across the patchy green grass behind the old house. Ruby stared, tilting her head slightly, the same way she does when reading a hard sentence. "I don't remember this moment," she said, "but I trust the photo more than the stories." "Photos are the most honest witnesses, they can't lie," I said. She folded the picture carefully and tucked it into the zip pocket of her backpack. "I'll visit you often, I promise." But could you not send me messages in the family chat? If Mom sees them, she'll know. I won't message anywhere, I replied. We'll keep this just between us. Ruby nodded. She looked around the kitchen, as if truly seeing it for the first time. The ticking wall clock, the hooks holding the blue china mugs, the window glass beaded with rain like a car just driven through a storm. I like this kitchen, she said. It doesn't demand that I be happy. It doesn't ask me to pretend. I laughed softly. This kitchen only asks that you wash your cup when you're done. I tipped my chin toward the sink. Take care of yours, will you? She stood, carried the cup to the sink, turned the faucet gently, worked the sponge in clumsy but careful circles. I watched her set the cup upright on the cloth, rim facing up instead of down. A habit from her house. In this house, I usually place them upside down. I didn't correct her. Tonight, the cup could stand like someone newly arrived. When the clock neared 7, Ruby pulled her hood up, zipped her jacket. I need to go. Good, I said. I touched her sleeve lightly. Be careful. The road is slick. She nodded. Are you angry with me? I don't have time to be angry with you, I answered. And you're a kind girl. No one could stay angry at a girl like you. A real smile, thin, but with an edge cut across her face. I'm heading home. She turned, stepped over the wet patch, disappearing around the fence corner. I waited a few beats to make sure no car pulled up unexpectedly at the end of the lane. Inside, I locked the door. I walked down the hall to the table and opened my notebook. Under the line, "Revoke power of attorney," I added, "Keep a place for Ruby not at the old table, but here in this kitchen." I set the pen down and listened as the rain slowly faded. Night settled over Greenway like a freshly washed quilt. I smiled to myself. The door had opened for the right person, and it was safe when closed. 2 weeks later, at high noon, the doorbell rang with 3 urgent chimes. I opened the door halfway. Jody stood on the porch in a beige coat, her face polished like she had just stepped out of an office. In her hands was a box of donuts with a logo from the shop near the mall. "I just want to talk, that's all," she said, her smile perfectly aligned with her teeth. "Good," I replied. "Come in." No greeting, no hug. I set the kettle on the stove and took down 2 cups. Jody placed the donut box on the table like a prop. Her eyes scanned the house, pausing at the new set of keys hanging by the door, and she gave a small nod as if she'd just made a mental note. "That night at my place, I think you misunderstood," Jody began, her tone light the way people sound when composing an email. "I heard you're planning to change some paperwork. Don't you think that might create confusion?" "I don't think so," I said, pouring the tea. "I'm simply clarifying who has the authority to decide my life." Jody gave a thin smile. "We're just worried someone might take advantage of you. At your age, many people are more easily influenced." She looked straight at me, waiting for me to reveal who was influencing me. "If I'm ever taken advantage of," I placed the cup in front of her, "it will be by my own decision." She stayed quiet for a beat. The smile drained inward, her eyes sharpening. "Either way, assets eventually belong to the children. Everyone understands that." The tone shifted, the sentence landing like a lead weight. I held her gaze. "You all really still believe that?" I lifted my cup, let the steam brush my lips, then set it down again. "Fine. There will be a gathering this weekend. Make sure everyone comes, I'll make the announcement." Jody's brows lifted surprise, then quick delight, like someone hearing about a promotion. "Perfect. I'll handle the messages. I know exactly who needs to be there." Her fingers were already touching the phone in her pocket. "Do you want us to prepare anything? I can make a list to keep things organized." "No need," I said. "Just arrive on time." "So, you've reconsidered?" She tilted her head, voice softening back into coaxing. "We can settle everything nicely. No drama. We're family, after all." "Yes," I said. "Family." I added no adjectives. Jody opened the box of donuts and nudged it toward me in a gesture of peace. "Want one? The cinnamon would go perfectly with tea." "I don't eat those." I pulled the box back toward her. "Take them home for Ruby." The name Ruby made her pause for half a beat. "She's been a bit impulsive lately. Please don't encourage her to come here too often. She needs to focus on school." "Up to you," I said, short. Jody's eyes flicked again to the key rack in the kitchen, then returned to the teacup. She lifted it, didn't drink, set it down, switching tactics mid-thought. You mentioned an announcement. I think we should invite a few more people so there won't be arguments later. Uncle Jim, Aunt Marlene, everyone has an interest. Invite whoever, I said. But don't call it a division of property. Call it what it is, the announcement of my decision. She chuckled, shook her head lightly, voice turning sweet again. It's all for the kids' future anyway. I just hope you'll leave a few things with real meaning. The leather chair, the blue china set, they're part of the family's history. I remember the history, I replied. Which is why I need to cut the repeating parts. Jody straightened, her voice dropping lower. If you choose something drastic, people may think you're not of sound mind. They might request an evaluation. I understand, I said. Thank you for the warning. I stood collecting the cups. Weekend, 3 o'clock, sharp. She stood too, zipping her coat. I'll notify everyone. You just prepare what you want to say. At the door, she turned back with a just right smile. I know you'll do the right thing. I'll do the right thing, I corrected. Not the thing that makes someone else feel comfortable. The door closed behind her, and the click of her heels faded from the porch. I stood still, listening as the house settled back into its natural quiet. My phone buzzed, messages flooded in. Jody had already created a new group, the name in bright capital letters like a flashing sign. Weekend meeting arranging family matters. Names poured in, aunts, uncles, in-laws, clapping emojis, thumbs ups. Someone typed, finally, we'll get clarity. Another, I'd like to reserve the painting above the fireplace. A cheerful suggestion. We should divide the hardcover books by the grandkids' ages fair and square. I scrolled and stopped at one private message from Carl. Don't worry, Mom. Let me coordinate. I didn't respond. I'm not letting anyone coordinate my voice again. I opened the drawer and pulled out the folder already prepared. The revocation of power of attorney sat on top, followed by drafts of the updated will and a short list of organizations I would send documents to after the announcement. I touched the paper's edge like testing a blade. Not too sharp, not dull, just right. Notifications kept popping along the side of the screen, more exclamation marks, more fair suggestions. I leaned back in the chair and breathed slowly. They were celebrating. They thought the old map was about to be colored in just the way they wanted. They hadn't seen the new road sign I'd already planted at the crossroads. Late on a weekend afternoon, I opened the windows to let the cool air in, then set the cobbler tray in the center of the long table. The tea kettle simmered, and I turned off the stove, moving the pot onto a wooden trivet. On the shelf by the door sat the thick file box, its cover clearly labeled with the name of the trust and the Greenway Women's Shelter. I ran a finger along the edge of the folder as if testing the edge of a blade. No long explanations, just say what needs to be said, I reminded myself one last time. A car stopped out front, followed by voices. Jody stepped in first, beige coat unbuttoned, her smile leading the way. Let's all sit in a circle, so it feels cozy. Behind her came both sides of the family, a few holding notebooks, pens poking out of jacket pockets. Whispers wove through the scent of cinnamon sugar. It should be divided per person. The valuable pieces should go to the main branch of the family. Everyone busy counting their shares before their coats were even off. Carl came in a moment later, scanning the room like checking its temperature. He tried a peacemaker's smile, patting an uncle's shoulder, nodding to Aunt Marlene. But his eyes kept sliding toward Jody, waiting for a cue. Mom, want me to make the tea? He asked, like performing a ritual. No, I said. Everything is ready. A sister-in-law pointed toward the glass cabinet. That blue china set would look great in my house, it'd just pop on the shelf. An uncle chimed in. This house should stay the family gathering place. Just pass it down, no fuss. Every word moved through me, the way sound moves through a pane of glass. They were talking to each other, as if I were already gone. Jody clapped softly. All right, thank you all for coming. Today we're going to clear things up, so there are no misunderstandings. She turned toward me, half teasing, half warning. Everything will go where it belongs. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, sat down, and placed the file box in the center. The thump of the cover on wood froze the room for one heartbeat. I opened it, pulled out the documents, no spoon-tapping glass, no small talk to smooth the floor. I simply looked at each face, like checking the lights before flipping a switch. I invited you here, I said, my voice steady and loud enough for the far end of the table, not to divide anything. I'm announcing a decision." Someone on the right laughed, thinking they misheard. Jody tilted her head, lips pressing closed. Carl set his hand on the table, tapping one finger. "The primary assets will be sold," I read, clear and measured. "All proceeds will go directly to the Greenway Women's Shelter through the trust already established. There will be no family inheritance." A spoon clinked against a plate. Someone cleared their throat. A cousin on the left stood abruptly. "This is bizarre. Who does that, Mabel?" "In places where a person's own decision is respected," I said, volume unchanged. Jody bared her teeth in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Haven't you thought about the kids at all? How could you be so cruel?" "I'm thinking about women who leave home without having time to put on shoes," I said. "And I'm thinking about the way I was spoken about on Halloween night." I didn't turn to Carl, but a sigh floated from his end of the table. "Mama," Carl murmured. An aunt pursed her lips. "Older people are easily influenced. We have the right to request a competency evaluation." "Feel free," I said. I signed everything myself, wide awake. I pushed the stack toward the center so the cover was visible. No one has the right to claim a share after they've spent years dismissing someone's dignity. A sister-in-law tried, but the blue china, no itemized lists. I cut in, my voice no louder but as hard as the table. "The china will be sold with everything else that needs to go. Nothing stays out of habit." Jody shifted tactics. "You can keep your decision without hurting us. We can negotiate." "I've negotiated for years by staying silent," I said. "Today, I'm speaking." An uncle growled. "So what do you think we are in this house? Strangers?" "I think everyone already told me what they are that night," I said. "As for me, I'm adding one line for clarity." I folded the file shut and fastened the elastic band. "I'm not taking back what I once gave. I'm taking back what you assumed I no longer had, the right to decide my own life." Carl shoved his chair back and stood the legs screeching across the floor. "Mom, at least talk to me privately." "We tried private," I said. The result was a whole group laughing. Jody clasped her hands, smiling twisted. "So you want to make me the villain in this?" "I'm not writing that story. I'm correcting mine," I said. A cousin declared, "I'm calling our family lawyer." I nodded, calm as watching rain hit the roof. "Go ahead. I have my own attorney." Silence rushed back into the house. I stood, closed the file box, and began pouring tea into cups. I didn't ask who wanted any. Jody picked hers up, then set it down untouched. Carl stared into his palms, fingers closing and opening like testing whether he could hold a shadow. I nudged the cobbler tray toward the center. "If anyone wants a slice, help yourselves." A child reached then was stopped by his mother, who whispered, "Leave it." I watched that and remembered I had washed a backup tray this morning. Jody exhaled sharply through her nose, grabbed her phone, eyes scanning fast, probably firing off messages to steady the panic. She looked up, her voice lower, sharper. "I won't let anyone exploit you." "I won't either," I said. At the porch, someone coughed and opened the door. Chairs scraped back, jackets rustled. Few words, mostly footsteps. One person reached out to shake my hand. I offered a thin smile, a brief tap, and pulled away. No arguing, no bargaining. The door opened and closed again and again, like a house practicing its breathing. Carl was the last to stay. He stood halfway down the table, searching for words. "Mom, he swallowed hard. "I didn't think you'd actually do it." "I did," I said. "And I'll keep going." He nodded slowly, hands in his coat pockets. "Well, see you around then." The words dropped to the floor, rolled once, and stopped. I walked him to the door and opened it. He stepped down to the walkway, pausing like he hoped someone would call out his name. No one did. I kept my hand on the doorframe until he opened his car door. The engine started. The car backed away and disappeared down the quiet road. The next morning, before the alarm could ring, my phone vibrated like a hailstorm. I let a few calls go unanswered, then opened it. Messages stacked like shingles, all in the same pre-written tone. "Blood is blood, you can't cut it off. Leave the kids something. Mabel, don't be extreme." I scrolled to the bottom, Carl calling. I let it ring 3 times, then picked up. "Mom, can we talk privately? I'll straighten everything out." "Everything is already straightened out." "There's nothing left to talk about," I said. Silence on the other end. I could hear his breath touch the mic before it vanished. The call ended. No follow-up text. I set the phone face down on the table, poured half a mug of tea, and sat listening to the warmth roll down my throat like exercise for my voice. A moment later, the screen lit again. A cousin messaged. "You're making your younger brother upset. He has a heart condition. If something happens, can you live with that?" I wrote in my notebook. Guilt trap, ignore. I didn't reply. My silence isn't agreement, it's a seatbelt. Right after that, Jody sent a picture of the kids. Ruby and Trent sitting on the rug, homework books in hand, heads lowered. Under the photo, one line, "They don't understand why their grandmother doesn't love them." I looked closely. Ruby wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking off to the side, like she heard a different voice outside the frame. I deleted the photo from the chat, no saving, no pinning. The trash icon said enough. By noon, the phone buzzed again. Rumor travels faster than clouds. A relative suggested bringing in respected elders in the community to give guidance. Someone attached the names of 2 church leaders and added, "They'll make you understand." I stepped out to the porch, swept a few wet leaves off the steps, then went back inside, washed my hands, dried them. I didn't refuse them with words. I let their plan run straight into an invisible wall. By afternoon, a strange number texted, "If you're not lucid, the law will step in." Then the whisper, carried through a few mouths and back to me, "We'll request a competency evaluation." I typed one sentence and sent it right back to that number. "Anyone who wants to try, try." The message showed seen, then disappeared. I turned off the screen. Outside, the wooden fence neither lowered nor rose because of their schemes. Ruby messaged privately, "Don't meet with that crowd. I'm coming over." I replied, "Come, back door." 15 minutes later, the familiar 3 taps. She walked in, cheeks pink from the wind, arms wrapped around a brown cardboard tube. "I drew this last night," she said, placing the tube on the table and pulling out a large sheet of paper. Dark and light pencil marks formed a simplified chessboard. On my side, only 2 pieces, a bishop and a pawn, but the position had the opposing king trapped in the corner. No escape. "You don't need many pieces," Ruby said, her voice soft but sure. "You just need the right position." I smiled, borrowed the scissors, cut a small piece of tape, and hung the sketch on the corner of the desk above my task list. Gray pencil, quiet but arguing more effectively than any defense. Ruby tilted her head to admire it, then exhaled as if relieved. "They're saying you're manipulating me," she said, eyes still on the drawing. "I told them I walk here on my own 2 feet. "Good," I said. "Walking strengthens the legs and lets the mind decide its own pace." She laughed quickly, then remembered something and pulled a red apple from her pocket. "I took this from the kitchen. Mom said it was for guests." She placed the apple in my hand. "Don't text me in the family group, okay? I don't want Mom reading my phone. I'll only send what's necessary. Arrived and home safe," I said. The rest silence. Toward evening, Carl called again. I answered on the first ring. I wasn't going to let him think I was hiding. "Mom, I know everyone's overreacting," he said, his voice trying to soften. "But at least give me one private conversation. I'll get everything back in order, I promise. I don't want this to go too far." "This has long passed the point of repair," I said. "There's no reason for you to try to see me. Everything worth saying has been said. The rest is silence." That afternoon, Greenway was dry and cold. I was wiping the window frame when I saw a figure stop at the walkway. Carl was holding a bouquet bought in a hurry, the price sticker still on the wrapping. He stood on the porch steps, not ringing the bell. The bell had long been silenced. "Mom?" he said, sitting down on the step, turning the bouquet in his hands like a steering wheel. "Give the kids a symbolic share. I'm begging you." I opened the door just a crack, leaning my shoulder against the wooden frame. "This decision is mine," I said slowly, placing each word where it belonged. "I'm not holding anything back." Carl set the flowers on his knees, unable to look up. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I know that. But don't punish us forever over one Halloween night." He lifted his eyes. "Please don't erase them from everything." "It's not one night," I replied. "It's years." That night was just the drop that spilled the cup. I held the door, not stepping back, not forward. He inhaled deeply. "Then what do you want to change your mind?" "I'll talk to everyone. I swear I'll stop all that nonsense." He tilted his head, searching my face for a crack. "There's no deal," I said. "Only boundaries." He shot to his feet. The heat inside him flipped direction like a switch. "You're abandoning your family," he said, voice hard. "I'll protect our rights myself. Everyone says I should." "Up to you," I answered. "Everyone is responsible for the words they choose." The reply was a glass wall, nothing to grab onto. "Fine," he said, picking up the flowers. "I never wanted it to get this far." He turned away. When I pushed the door shut, the hinge scraped the frame in a sharp, thin line of sound like a blade tested on stone. The next morning, a thick envelope slid through the mail slot. I opened it and read a letter full of polished, frigid language. Phrases like, "To our knowledge, we hereby request," considering the possibility of legal action. Words winding like ivy to hide a wall. I didn't interpret it myself. I called Lena's office and met with Charles, the one who handled the heavier legal matters. We sat in a small conference room, white paper, black pen. I read a few passages aloud. He underlined several phrases. "This is just pressure," he said calmly. "We'll respond by the book. After a difficult stage, if they continue, we move to step 2. I nodded and signed where needed. When I set the pen down, even the rustle of the paper sounded more sensible than a pile of threats. In the days that followed, strange mail arrived. A flyer advertising family mediation services, a birthday card sent to the wrong address, an unmarked envelope containing a printed article about filial duty. I gathered them into one box and wrote with pencil on the lid, "Not necessary." Then I called a moving service. Willowview had a vacancy on the second floor, a window facing west, where the afternoon sun cut a bright square on the wall. I chose it. On moving day, I brought only what I knew I would use: my tea set, a few books to reread, the old picture frame, and Ruby's sketch rolled in its tube. The movers carried the kitchen table out first. I followed behind, resting a hand on its edge like saying goodbye to an old friend. The door closed slowly, without fanfare. The keys hung on the hook. I took them down, placed them in a white envelope, and wrote, "For the Realtor." Willowview welcomed me with clean carpeted hallways and the scent of fresh paint. The apartment was small, bright, and quiet. The heater ticking in a familiar rhythm, white cabinets, wooden countertops. I opened the window, letting the air fill the room. The opposite wall waited for something to look at. I opened the cardboard tube, took out the sketch, and taped it up. My 2 chess pieces stood in their same positions, the opposing king trapped in the corner with no move left. I set a small green branch, just bought from the shop on the corner, on the windowsill. In this room, there were so few things that each one had a purpose, even a scrap of leaf. By late afternoon, I made tea. The sound of boiling water meeting the teapot warmed my hands just listening. I pulled out a chair, wrapped my palms around the cup, and felt silence fill the room full, not hollow. In the old house, silence was paint peeled away, exposing damp wood. Here, quiet was still water, no need for approval, no need to hide. I closed my eyes and let myself breathe long enough for my ribs to press against my sweater. Then came 3 familiar knocks at the door. I smiled that knock needed no peephole. Ruby walked in, hair a little mussed from the wind, eyes bright like someone who'd jogged up the stairs. I tried to find the elevator, but never mind, stairs are faster, she said, dropping her backpack. She looked around. Nice, clean, no extra people. I pointed to the sketch. "Your old friend." Ruby tilted her head, smiled, then pulled a key attached to a cloth strap from her pocket. "This is my key for you," she said, placing it in my hand, her palm small but sure. "In case I come by and you're out taking a walk." She leaned to look down at the street. "Mom is going to hate this place," she blurted, then winced. I shrugged. "People hate places where their voices echo back without changing anything." Ruby nodded, as if writing down a line at the top of her notebook. We sat and ate a few cookies she'd brought. She took a pencil and added a thin stroke in the corner of the drawing, a tiny round dot, like a stone set to block a path. "Just to show I'm here," she said, not looking at me. "Not to trap you, to keep the corner from being pushed in." I laughed low in my throat, a sound as small as a porch light flicking on. "All right," I said, "that dot is allowed to stay." I took out a small box lined with fabric, placed the key Ruby had given me inside, and closed the lid. On top, I stuck a label. Ruby. A new kind of connection chosen by 2 people, requiring no family meeting or vote. When Ruby left, I walked her to the door. The hallway was empty, the elevator's surface warping our reflection slightly. She waved as she stepped inside. I'm heading home, she said. I'll text tomorrow. The doors slid shut, leaving me with the sound of the heater and the sunset dropping one more notch. I returned to the apartment and locked the door. The bolt slid into its slot perfectly. I laid my hand on the sketch, feeling the paper warm beneath my palm. Outside, pleas and threats and official letters were still swirling somewhere like wind slipping over rooftops. In here, a small room had given me back the right to be undisturbed, and a key had found the box where it belonged. I poured more tea and watched the steam rise evenly. Silence no longer meant emptiness. It was space where I could hear myself speak quietly and not disappear. The first night at Willowview, I had just set my teacup down when the landline rang one sharp, abrupt beep, like a mosquito trapped against the ear. I picked up. A neutral voice, trying to sound official. "We've received a report. We may need to investigate elder welfare." I listened through the whole line without interrupting. "Will you cooperate?" the voice asked, waiting for me to take my part in fear. I answered, "If you're with a real agency, send me a formal letter." Then I hung up slowly so they'd hear the click of the receiver settling into place. That night, around 2 a.m, someone rang the doorbell once and ran. Willowview has a camera in the lobby, but I didn't go downstairs. I had already silenced the bell. Only knuckles on wood could get through now. In the morning, on the doormat, lay a piece of paper, block letters printed, "Alone is unsafe." I folded the page in half and dropped it into the "not necessary" box. The next wave changed its tone. A relative wrote, "A reunion plan, attaching a potluck list, a date and time, and a promise. If you change your mind, we'll have an apology dinner." Messages stacked like calendars. There was a speeches segment, even a kids' play zone. I scrolled through them without stopping. Jody messaged privately, "You're turning my daughter into a traitor." I stared at that for a few seconds, seeing the rope at the end ready to be looped around anyone's neck. I didn't reply. I kept every message. Evidence saves breath. While the phone chose exhaustion, paperwork chose another rhythm. Heavy, slow, precise. The home sale finalized after a difficult process, viewings rescheduled, a buyer with more questions, an inspector wanting the porch crack repaired, a signature on page 17 needing a rewrite where the ink smudged. I went through each step, never letting anyone hold the pen for me. On the final signing day, I sat in a small conference room, white lights, composite wood table. The pen carried just the right weight. When the scanner beeped its last beep, I knew the old house had left my name like an adult, finally stepping out of a coat too tight, though once warm. The next morning, I went to the Greenway Women's Shelter. A low brick building, glass door covered with counseling schedules. The receptionist led me into a small room with a round table and a tissue box in the center. The director, a short-haired, silver-haired woman, eyes shadowed by lack of sleep but bright, entered and took my hand in both of hers. I pulled out the check and placed it in her hand. "For those who had to leave without time to grab their shoes," I said. The director looked up, not smiling. Her lips trembled just slightly. "Thank you," she said, folding the check and tucking it into a firm folder. Outside, someone coughed softly. A door opened, 2 children passed by, each holding a box of plastic toys. No loud voices, just wet eyes. And a promise in the form of action. It will be used where it belongs. I stepped outside. Greenway opened a patch of blue. The midday breeze cooled my forehead like a damp cloth. The lightness I felt wasn't triumph. It was like removing a splinter from a toe. Walking no longer needed to be cautious. On the way home, I stopped at a home goods store, bought an ivory candle and a small glass holder. I thought of evening, of my desk, of a flame that needs no permission. Late afternoon, a hand-delivered envelope waited in the Willowview mailbox. No stamp, no postmark. My name on the front, Carl's handwriting. I opened it in the kitchen, where the light was just enough. Inside were 3 lined notebook pages, rushed handwriting but legible. "Mom," he began. I admit I laughed when I shouldn't have. I thought that was how I eased the room, made it lighter. Turns out it landed on you like weight. In the middle, I see Ruby changing. She is doing what I thought only grown-ups knew how to do, draw a boundary and keep it. And near the end, "Mom, if there's still a chance, I want to relearn how to be your son. I'm not asking for a share. I'm asking for time." I read it, folded it, read it again. Ink in places had blurred like rain. I looked at my own hands, holding the pages. Steady. I opened a drawer, laid the letter inside, and closed it. Not torn, not answered. Some words must remain still, or they turn into new contracts. That night, the phone tried a few last ragged breaths, threatening, pleading, bargaining. I left it face down. I lit the candle in its glass holder, its flame rose slow, pointed like a fine pen. The small gold light gave Ruby's chest sketch a different shade, softening the pencil's hard lines. I pulled up a chair, sat straight, and watched the flame without blinking. In this quiet, I heard something beyond the heaters ticking. My own breath, in and out, steady as a clock hand. I opened my notebook and wrote one line. Some apologies must lie still if boundaries are to survive. I dotted the period and closed the book. Outside the window, the small town breathed through golden porch lights flicking on at day's end. Somewhere, someone might be drafting another reunion plan, picking new potluck dishes, adding a few more elders to the bottom of the list. In here, one room promised nothing except to keep one person safe in their own quiet. I stayed until the candle dipped into a shallow ring, wax pooling into a thin rim. I blew lightly, the flame vanished fast, leaving a wisp of white smoke. In the scent of cooling wax, I spoke almost without sound. That's enough. Then I stood, washed my cup, drew the curtain closed. The night folded neatly, like a notebook snapped shut, and I, the writer, chose not to add another line to this day. On the morning of my 73rd birthday, I fried 2 pancakes in a cast-iron skillet, both sides perfectly golden, butter bubbling in tiny rings around the edges. The tea had steeped long enough, warm steam rising like a thin ribbon of mist. I opened the window to let the morning breeze flow through the Willowview apartment, brushing against Ruby's chest sketch so the paper fluttered. I placed the pancakes on a plate, poured a bit of syrup over them, one for me, and the other left untouched, a new habit, saving a place for someone who knocks with the truth. 3 familiar knocks sounded just as I poured the tea. Ruby stepped in, holding a bouquet of red tulips wrapped in craft paper, a card on top showing 2 chairs on a front porch, one with a teacup. "Happy birthday, Grandma," she said, handing me the flowers. I placed the tulips in a glass vase. The red broke the tidy colors of the kitchen, deepening the light. Ruby set the card beside the empty plate and sat down, looking around as if testing the rhythm of the room before nodding, satisfied. "Don't you have class?" I asked. "Not until this afternoon," she said, cutting the second pancake in half. "This morning, I want to sit in the chair with the teacup." We ate slowly, listening to the elevator move up and down like the quiet heartbeat of a building with no complaints. Ruby told me about her American literature assignment. She rewrote a dialogue in the narrator's sarcastic voice and still got an A. I chuckled. "The A is nice, but keeping your own voice is the real top score," I said. She smiled, propping the birthday card upright like a signpost. Near noon, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Marcia and Ida, 2 older friends carrying a box of butter cookies and a folded newspaper. "Happy birthday," Marcia said, hugging me with her thin but steady arms. Ida laid down the paper. "New crossword. Let's see if you can guess the 6-letter word for calmness." We brewed more tea, set out the cookies, and chatted about small but true things. Milk prices rising, Ida's left knee feeling less stiff, Marcia trying new backstretch videos online. No one mentioned the disputes. No one recalled the messages. Their presence felt like a warm coat, not heavy, slipped on to cross a drafty hall. Ruby tapped a pencil over the crossword clues, reading them aloud. We took turns answering, laughing when wrong, humming a tiny when right. I watched and saw something I thought was gone, a kitchen full of people where no one pushes anyone aside. When Marcia and Ida left, they promised, "We'll send pictures of the neighbor's new cat later." I nodded and stood at the door until the elevator closed. Ruby washed the cups, letting them drip dry, upright, rim facing up, like she always does. This time, I left them that way. Different habits sharing the same kitchen, and neither needing to be corrected to exist. In the afternoon, sunlight stretched into a golden rectangle on the floor. I pulled my chair to the desk and opened the notebook I'd started the night of Halloween. The first page read, in bold red ink, "From now on, I will show up without begging." I flipped through each page, short milestones, revoking power of attorney, changing the locks, meeting with Lena, the announcement day, the flood of messages, then silence, the move, the check placed into the right hands. each page a step with less hesitation than the one before. I stopped at today's page, the pen stroke steady. In the margin, Ruby had drawn a thin line, like a thread running straight through the whole book. I wrote simply, "I have returned to my own name." I closed the notebook and stood to make more tea. The scent of tea and tulips blended into something without a name. Ruby sat on the windowsill, chin in her hands, watching the dented clouds above the opposite building. "If Mom asks where I went today," she said without turning, "I'll tell her I went to someone who knows how to keep quiet. Silence takes practice," I replied. "Like a muscle. You seem stronger," she said. "I feel it." I smiled. Sunset warmed the windowsill like a gentle palm. I turned off the overhead light, letting the late sun do its work, casting gold across the sketch. The last two chess pieces, still holding their ground, their shadows growing long and firm. I stood still, then spoke aloud, letting an old question step out of my chest wearing a new shape. "Why am I still alive?" I paused, hearing the heater breathe steadily. To remember my name, to set my own table, to open the door only for those who knock with clean hands. Ruby sat upright and looked at me. "I heard that," she said, nothing more. I nodded, a signature exchanged between two people who understood the document. As evening settled, porch lights blinked on across the small town. I poured more tea, set the spoon down, the soft chime of metal on porcelain, a punctuation mark. Ruby's sketch glowed warm, pencil strokes turning into something like ink alive. I pulled my chair closer to the table, leaving space not for someone expected, but for myself to sit without shrinking back. Ruby slipped into her shoes. "I'm heading home, Grandma. I'll text tonight." She lifted her hand. I touched it lightly, not holding too long. The door opened and closed. The lock clicked cleanly. I stood for a few seconds, listening to her absence, not loud, but making the room feel more neatly arranged. I rinsed the cups, warming the porcelain with the water, dried them, and set them on the shelf. The tulips leaned into each other, red like embers that won't go out. I sat again and turned on the small desk lamp. The glow wrapped the tabletop like a soft shawl. No chair left for contempt. That space was now a home for the flowers. The remaining chairs were enough for people who know how to listen, even when they say nothing. I laid my hand flat on the wood, feeling the grain pass beneath my skin, knowing this table is mine, a table no one tilts, no one renames for me. I don't need applause to exist. One cup of tea, one lamp, one drawing, one vase of tulips, enough and complete. The story ends with a bright silence. And if tomorrow someone asks what this table is for, I'll say, to hold what matters and to refuse what doesn't. Here, there is room only for truth and dignity. The story you just heard is fictional, but in every averted glance at a family gathering, in every legal document brushed aside, there lies a truth many people are afraid to name. When kindness is treated like an obligation, silence becomes a tightening noose. Mabel didn't choose to fight back with shouting. She chose to reclaim her right to decide something anyone who's ever been pushed away from their own family table understands. When you take back the right to sign your own name, you rescue the rest of your life. Names and details may have been changed to protect real people, but the bitter ache of being dismissed by your own family, that part stays untouched. We tell this story not to glorify one woman's strength, but to remind you, dignity doesn't require permission, it's built through boundaries. If you have ever been treated like a burden after years of holding the whole family up, stayed quiet so long that people mistook silence for submission, been shoved away from a table you built with your own two hands, then remember this: justice doesn't have to be loud. It shows up the moment you say, "enough," and walk away without looking back. Comment if you've ever had to choose between letting it go for peace and protecting your self-respect so you could keep living. And if you believe calm resolve is the most powerful final move, share this story. Somewhere out there, someone may need a reason to keep a tight grip on the key to their own life. Don't forget to subscribe, because here, every story is a sharp cut, cutting off disrespect, stitching dignity back together, teaching the heart to stand tall even when there's no chair left at the table. On the end screen, you'll find 2 more stories about people once treated as the leftovers in their own families, who built their seats back with their own hands. Trust me, you won't just watch. You'll recognize yourself in the light of the table that Mabel now calls her own.